What's up, guys? Steven here with Way of West Outdoors, back in the WooWo studio, and today we're talking about scopes, and in particular, second focal plane versus first focal plane, or some people might call it front focal plane, but that's beside the point. FFP versus SFP. What I'm talking about here, second focal plane versus first focal plane, is actually the reticle and how the reticle relates to the target that you see through the scope. So second focal plane is going to be your normal 3x9 scope that you see that your dad used on his old 270. Duplex reticle, no hash marks, no nothing, just crosshairs. You zoom in, picture gets bigger, and the reticle just stays where it's at. Reticle doesn't do anything, it has no relation to the zoom, anything. That's your second focal plane scope. Very basic, very old school, nothing crazy about it, nothing wrong with it, just it is what it is. And so what first focal plane is actually when you zoom in on your target through your scope, the reticle also increases in size and stays the same relation to the target. Nowadays we have all these scopes that have hash marks and mils and MOA and measurements on the inside scope. Some just have BDC reticles like the ballistic drop chart reticles where you can have holdovers and wind holds. Those hash marks on the inside there have to mean something, right? They have to be in relation to the target. If your target size changes as you magnify in and out like a second focal plane does, without the reticle changing in size, those hash marks don't really mean anything except for maybe on a specific spot on the scope. We'll get into that in a second. The first focal plane, if you're on 3 power or 18 power, that reticle will actually zoom in and zoom out with the target, and it stays in the same relation to the target. So reticle, target, they zoom in and out together. I think I beat that horse dead, hopefully. So going forward, and what you would choose second focal plane versus first focal plane for. When it comes to Western hunting, I'll tell you right now, I always choose first focal plane. The reason for that is, and if you've ever watched any of my other videos, I try to take all error out of the situation, and first focal plane always means what it means, and there's no second guessing it. If I'm on 3 power or 18 power, that mark inside the reticle still means something. It still means 1 MOA or 1 MRAD, or the BDC reticle on the inside means something, that it's an actual drop chart. When you get to a second focal plane, if you're on 3 power or 18 power, that reticle on the inside changes in relation to the target. So it doesn't really mean anything at all levels. You have to either do math, know what it is, or you have to be on max power, which a lot of second focal plane scopes, once you're on max power, those marks on the inside actually mean something, and everything else, it's kind of like if you're on 17.5 power or 6 power or something, all those reticles are just kind of, I don't know, they're just kind of there for a reference. Like you can't hold wind with it and rely on those marks. So that's a big reason I use first focal plane, is it always means something, and no matter where it's at. So when I'm in the heat of the moment and I'm going to deer hunting and I've got to hold for wind, or I've got to hold over, or something quick or something along those lines, I don't have to think about what power I'm on, anything else. The reticle just is what it is. I look at the scope, I see the reticle. One downfall of a first focal plane scope is when you are on that 3 power, that reticle seems very, very small. So you have to zoom in to kind of understand what you're looking at. You have to zoom in to make that reticle big enough to really see what you're looking at. But if you're just making a 100-yard shot at 3 power and you don't need to use the reticle, you're fine. But if you're backed all the way out and need to use the hash marks, you're running into challenges. I have never really run into that situation, so it's not an issue for me, but it's something I know people complain about, is when that scope is zoomed all the way out, the reticle does seem very small. And the second focal plane and has that advantage, it always is visible. It's always big enough to see. One myth that I want to squash, guys, is the thickness of the reticle on a first focal plane scope. A lot of people say when you zoom in, that first focal plane reticle gets really, really thick and it covers a lot of the target. Like, I've even heard people say it's dangerous. I think that's a little insane. So the thickness of a first focal plane scope reticle is often like 0.14, 0.15, even sometimes smaller than that. If you think about that, 0.14 MOA at 500 yards is 3/4 of an inch. Like, so your reticle is covering 3/4 of an inch of the target. It means you have a 1-inch pasty out there at 500 yards, you can still kind of see the edges of it. At 1,000 yards, the reticle is covering 1.4 inches of the target. So like 1,000 yards away, in 1.4 inches. I mean, it's nothing. So yeah, the reticle may appear large in the scope, but it's really not covering that much of the scope. I mean, you might have these 25 power scopes, so the reticle might look ginormous, but in reality, it's not. You zoom all the way out, the reticle is really small. You zoom all the way in, that reticle is really big. But again, it's not dangerous. It's not covering a ton of the target. It's covering such a small amount of the target it's negligible. So that's not something I would worry about ever. The other advantages of a second focal plane scope would be if you're doing a lot of jump shooting, a lot of jump brush shooting, and 3 power, and the reticle just needs to be able to be visible at all times. That's probably the way you want to go with it. You don't want to be on 3 power and have a hard time finding the reticle when you're shooting at something. Like a lot of times if you're, maybe if you're pig hunting or something like that, when you're shooting on 3 power with the first focal plane scope and you're going to be shooting at a black target with a black reticle, it can be hard to find that reticle. One other thing between the second focal plane and the first focal plane is sometimes the second focal plane can actually be a little bit lighter. A lot of times I've seen like an ounce or two. It's really, if you're making an ultralight rifle and that's something you're worried about and you're trying to count every single itty bitty ounce, might be something you want to think about. And the other thing, a lot of times the second focal plane is about $100 cheaper. I've never seen it. I mean, maybe there's some other outliers out there, but a lot of times the first focal plane, because the technology that's in the scope, it's just a little bit more expensive. But it's marginal. It's not like it's double the price or anything else. It's just a little bit different. The second focal plane has its place. But for me personally in Western, and then that's kind of what I specialize, that's what I like to do, that's where I'm at, I'll always use first focal plane scopes because a lot of times I have my dope chart on my gun, so if it needs to be in a hurry, I don't have time to range and everything else. I have a range, I have a dope, I can adjust, I can hold over, I can hold wind, and no matter what power I'm on, 3 to whatever power I'm at, it always works. One piece of advice I will give kind of in closing here is, if you ever watch any of my other videos, is keep everything the same. Don't bounce back and forth between second focal plane and first focal plane. Maybe you have a jump gun or something like that. That's your second focal plane scope. That makes sense. But if you have like Western hunting rifles, like a deer rifle and an elk rifle, and you're shooting long range with them, stick with one. Second focal plane or first focal plane, stick with one thing, because I've had the issues in the past where it's just as simple as like sighting in, right? I'm shooting this gun, I have a second focal plane gun on the scope, or second focal plane scope on the gun, and I shoot and I use those hash marks like, oh, it's 2 MOA high, and I go down 2 MOA. It doesn't move very much, and I'm like, what is going on? I can't get it. And then I realized I have a second focal plane scope, and the magnification I was on doesn't actually mean 2 MOA. It means who the hell knows. So I was chasing rounds for a little while. Instead of a first focal plane scope, you pull the trigger, you see where the hole is in the paper, and you're like, oh, I'm 2 MOA high. No matter what power you're on, you dial down 2 MOA, and that bullet is going to be damn near right on top of the bullseye. It makes for easy figure, it makes for easy adjustment. So that's my quick and dirty opinion on second focal plane versus first focal plane. First focal plane is the winner, in my opinion. It's simple. It never changes. And in the heat of the moment, I don't have to think about anything. I dial, I hold, I use the reticle as I need to use it. I don't have to worry about what magnification I'm on, or even if I'm backed off a little bit, or, just one less thing to screw up. Yeah. First focal plane, guys. If you think I'm wrong, argue about it in the comments. Tell me I'm dumb. Like and subscribe. See ya.